You wake up just before sunrise. There is no alarm, no calendar, no emails waiting for you. No shift begins at 9 o'clock. The only thing pulling you out of sleep is the sound of birds somewhere beyond the trees and the smell of yesterday's fire slowly fading into the cold morning air. You stretch, stand, and look across a landscape with no roads, no buildings, and no clocks. For nearly all of human history, this was an ordinary morning. Yet if someone asked you what these people did all day, your first answer would probably be simple. They hunted. But that assumption hides one of the biggest misunderstandings about human history. Anthropologists estimate that more than 95% of all humans who have ever lived existed before farming, factories, or formal jobs. For hundreds of thousands of years, there were no employers, no salaries, and no weekends. Yet our species survived long enough to spread across every continent except Antarctica. So, what filled their days? The answer changes how you think about work itself. Because for most of human existence, staying alive had surprisingly little in common with having a job. In 1968, anthropologist Richard B. Lee traveled into the Kalahari Desert to study the Zhu Huanxi, often called the Kung San. Many outsiders assumed they spent every waking hour desperately searching for food. Instead, Lee measured something unexpected. Adults often gathered enough food in around 15 to 20 hours each week. That number shocked researchers. Even after adding cooking, tool maintenance, childcare, and camp tasks, daily life still contained long stretches without what we would call work. Lee later described hunter-gatherers as living in what he called the original affluent society. Not because they owned more, because they often needed less. The Zhu Huanzi gathered berries, melons, roots, nuts, and edible plants. Men usually hunted large animals, but hunting was unpredictable. Some hunts lasted hours and ended with nothing. Gathering, however, quietly supplied a large share of the community's calories. Food wasn't produced inside a workplace. It was collected from an environment people understood with extraordinary precision. A single elder could recognize hundreds of edible plants, identify animal tracks only minutes old, and remember hidden water sources across vast distances. Knowledge replaced infrastructure. Memory replaced maps. Every walk through the landscape was also a lesson. Children weren't sent into classrooms, they learned by watching adults every single day. A child might spend the morning following an older sibling, learning which insects could be eaten, which snakes to avoid, or how broken branches revealed the direction an antelope had moved. There were no written exams. The environment tested you instead. But here's where it gets stranger. If survival required relatively few hours, what happened during the rest of the day? In the 1970s, anthropologist Marjorie Shostak spent years living with the Zhu/Huanxi while documenting daily life. She discovered something many modern people struggle to imagine. Conversation itself occupied enormous amounts of time. People talked while gathering food. They talked while repairing tools. They talked around fires long after sunset. Stories carried survival information across generations. One story might explain why a certain valley flooded during heavy rains. Another preserved the behavior of dangerous predators. Another reminded listeners which plants became poisonous during certain seasons. Entertainment and education were often the same thing. You didn't separate learning from living. You absorbed it through constant participation. This wasn't wasted time. Human brains evolved inside these conversations. Language became one of our greatest survival tools because information could outlive the people who first discovered it. Knowledge accumulated without books. Each conversation became part of humanity's earliest library. Social relationships mattered just as much. Among hunter-gatherers, your survival often depended less on what you owned than on who trusted you. If today's hunt failed, another family's success became your meal. Tomorrow, the roles might reverse. Food moved constantly through the group. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies repeatedly found strong traditions of sharing, especially after successful hunts. Keeping everything for yourself wasn't simply selfish. It threatened the survival of everyone, including you, because no hunter succeeded every day. The safest investment wasn't storing wealth, it was storing goodwill. Except there was a problem. Sharing only works if nobody becomes too powerful. So ancient humans developed invisible rules that quietly prevented inequality before it could grow. In the early 1960s, Anthropologist James Woodburn began studying the Hadza of northern Tanzania, one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer societies. He noticed something unusual. Nobody could accumulate very much. If someone hunted a large animal, the meat was divided across the camp. If another family found honey, everyone shared. Most possessions were simple enough to carry on foot. A person who tried to control resources quickly discovered something important. The group could simply leave. Mobility acted like an invisible equalizer. Without permanent houses or fields, power had nowhere to settle. Leadership existed, but it was temporary. The best hunter was not automatically the leader. The oldest person did not command everyone else. People listened because they respected experience, not because anyone could force obedience. For hundreds of thousands of years, human societies survived with remarkably little hierarchy. That changes how you think about authority. Your brain evolved in small groups where cooperation usually mattered more than competition. Large organizations, corporations, and governments are astonishingly recent additions to the human story. But daily life was never just about finding food and sharing it. There was another activity that consumed countless hours. In the 1930s, Dutch historian Johan Huizinga published Homo Ludens. His argument was radical. Play is not the opposite of work. Play is one of the foundations of civilization. Among hunter-gatherers, children played almost constantly. They threw sticks like spears, they tracked imaginary animals, they climbed trees, they wrestled, they copied adults. From the outside, it looked like games. From an evolutionary perspective, it was training. A missed throw during childhood became a more accurate spear decades later. Pretending to follow animal tracks became genuine tracking. Even adults joined in, singing, dancing, imitating animals, friendly competitions. These activities strengthen memory, trust, and coordination. Modern neuroscience suggests that play improves learning by encouraging experimentation without catastrophic consequences. Ancient humans understood that long before laboratories existed. Around 12,000 years ago, near the end of the last ice age, the world entered a period of dramatic environmental change. People began returning to the same locations more often. Eventually, some stopped moving altogether. Agriculture slowly appeared. At first, it probably seemed like progress. Food could be grown instead of searched for. Villages expanded, storage became possible, population increased, but archaeologists noticed an unexpected pattern. Skeletons from early farming communities often show signs of poorer health than many hunter-gatherers. People became shorter in some regions, dental cavities increased, diet became less varied, life became more repetitive, farming produced more food overall. It also demanded more continuous labor. Fields could not be ignored. Seeds had to be planted on time, weeds removed, harvests protected, animals managed. For the first time, your survival depended on staying in one place and repeating the same tasks season after season. Work, as you recognize it today, began to emerge. Not because humans suddenly loved labor, because civilization required consistency. The schedule slowly replaced the seasons. The clock eventually replaced the sunrise. In 1930, economist John Maynard Keynes made a famous prediction. He believed technological progress would eventually reduce the average workweek to around 15 hours. Machines, he thought, would free humans from endless labor. Nearly a century later, technology has become more powerful than Keynes could have imagined. Yet many people work 40 hours a week, sometimes far more. The irony is difficult to ignore. Hunter-gatherers spent their free time strengthening relationships. Modern humans often spend that same time answering notifications. This does not mean ancient life was easy, far from it. Children died young. Injuries could become fatal. Droughts and harsh winters threatened entire groups. Predators were real. There were no hospitals, no antibiotics, no emergency services. Life was uncertain in ways most of us will never experience, but uncertainty is different from constant occupation. Ancient humans were busy when survival demanded it. That distinction may be one of the biggest differences between their world and yours. Today, you probably divide your life into work and everything else. One earns a living, the other begins after the workday ends. For almost all of human history, that separation didn't exist. Finding food, teaching children, telling stories, making tools, resting, exploring, and strengthening relationships were not separate categories. They were all part of the same continuous experience of being alive. The strange truth is that your brain was shaped during that world. Jobs are one of the newest inventions in the human story. But the instincts you carry to work every morning are unimaginably older.